This month, the United States national debt reached the $23 trillion mark for the first time ever. There was no fanfare, there were no politicians giving speeches about fiscal responsibility, and there has been very little national outrage. We have simply come to accept that it is normal for our national debt to grow at an exponential rate, but the truth is that we are literally committing national suicide. Given enough time, there is no doubt that this colossal mountain of debt will kill our republic, and yet fiscal responsibility is not even a major national issue any longer. Everyone seems to be okay with the fact that we are stealing more than $100 million every single hour of every single day from future generations of Americans and destroying a bright future that they were supposed to have. What we are doing to our children and our grandchildren is beyond criminal, and yet very few of us seem to care. The United States government's debt, which broke $22 trillion for the first time this year, is on an unsustainable path according to a report from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Debt in itself isn't a problem unless income is lagging, the paper said, and for the governments that typically means money raised by taxes. The United States is in its 19th year of deficit spending. Income has not exceeded spending since 2001, the year President George Bush took over from President Bill Clinton. The United States government debt is currently on an unsustainable path. The federal debt is projected to grow at a faster rate than GDP for the foreseeable future, wrote Scott Voller of the St. Louis Fed and Caitlin Ferking, a student at the University of Missouri. Trends that are unsustainable will not continue, cause the economy will adjust, sometimes in abrupt and jarring ways. But a little over a decade later, we are staring at the prospect of yet another recession, with all indicators pointing to an even scarier situation than in 2008. In the last global financial crisis, central banks were able to respond quickly and aggressively, and they only managed to reduce the effects and not avert the situation. An asset bubble triggered the 2008 recession, but this time it's the balloon in global debt levels that threatened the spark of the fire. The IMF has reported that global debt is at the highest levels ever at $184 trillion, with major nations that includes USA, China and Japan accounting for more than half the amount, which is effectively more than their combined economic output. Modern United States economic history predicts the next crisis will occur between 2019 and 2021. That does not tell you where it will come from, what the results will be, and how to defend yourself. What would have protected you in previous crisis might be the worst thing to do in the next one. You must watch for the warning signals. That first sign is an asset bubble. In 2008, it was housing prices. In 2001, it was high-tech stock market prices. In 1929, it was the stock market. It's usually accompanied by a feeling that everyone is getting rich beyond their wildest dreams by investing in this asset class. The next warning is the get rich quick ads everywhere. You feel like you're being left out, and this is true for some time leading up to the crash. That's the nature of an asset bubble. The events of the fall of 2008 are a lesson in what eventually happens when rational thinking gives way to irrationality. While good intentions were likely the catalyst leading to the decision to expand the subprime mortgage market back in 1999, somewhere along the way the United States lost its senses. The higher home prices went, the more creative lenders got in an effort to keeping them going even higher. with a seemingly complete disregard for the potential consequences. When one considers the irrational growth of the subprime mortgage market, along with the investment vehicles creatively derived from it, combined with the explosion of consumer debt, maybe the financial turmoil of 2008 was not as unforeseeable as many would like to believe. Lawmakers are representatives for their constituents. This goes without saying, but lawmakers are unlikely to address the ever-increasing national debt until voters demand action. What remains unfathomable to many voters is how much money $22.5 trillion truly is. As John Miltimore has written, the problem is that the human mind has trouble understanding a figure so huge. Here are some facts that help put into perspective just how large is the sum of $22.5 trillion is. First, in order to pay down our national debt, you would have to combine the GDP of China, Japan, and India. The United States owes $68,400 per citizen. The United States owes $183,000 per taxpayers. The United States currently has $125 trillion as unfunded liabilities. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the United States debt held by the public will reach 100% of GDP in 2028. In 2008, interest on the federal debt was $253 billion. Interest for fiscal year 2019 is roughly 89% higher. For fiscal year 2019, interest alone on the federal debt is $479 billion. In 1979, total federal government receipts were $463 billion. In the year 2000, the federal debt was $5.67 trillion. In 2019, federal debt is 297% higher. At Forbes, Jim Powell writes that the old New Deal cost about $50 billion from 933 to 940, whereas the future cost of all New Deal programs still in effect is reckoned at more than $50 trillion. A recent analysis by the CBO projected that the federal budget deficit will grow to $1 trillion alone in 2020. As of December 2018, only 10 countries have worse debt-to-GDP ratios than the United States. At NPR, Daniel Kutzleben writes that Senator Bernie Sanders' taxation and spending plans would together add $18 trillion to the national debt over a decade. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, roughly 24% of federal spending goes to Social Security, 26% to federal health insurance programs, 9% to safety net programs, and only 2% on transportation infrastructure. By 2025, the cost of servicing our national debt will exceed the cost of our military spending. The cost of implementing an universal basic income, presidential candidate Andrew Young's Central Social Program proposal, would cost $3.8 trillion per year, or roughly 85% of current federal spending. It will take the United States 713,470 years to pay down the national debt if it paid $1 per second of a year. The Federal Reserve purchased large amounts of federal debt as part of its quantitative easing program, thus cheapening the cost of money. We might as well give up hand-wringing over the deficit. It's never going to stop. It can't. The alternative will be total economic collapse. This is a new economic paradigm, one we don't fully understand yet, based on how much can be manufactured, distributed and bought, not on how much money is in circulation. As long as there's plenty of stuff to buy, and as long as others are willing to take our money in exchange for it, the dance can go on forever. One reason for the purposeful concentration of the wealth into just a few hands is that if all the money printed were more equitably distributed, the increased economic stimulation might overwhelm the ability of manufacturing sector to keep up with the increased demand, triggering inflation, which could collapse the entire economic system, not to mention the dramatic increase in pollution that will also follow. But as it is now, the careful filtering of money into the lower classes creates a balance between demand and production which keeps things in check. Real money has not existed since the world went off the gold standard, but it's taken us 100 years to figure out the full implications of that. And no one is sure where this is going to take us or where the journey will end. Put this all together and it looks like a very toxic mix. Countries need to recognize their mutual interest in avoiding a full-blown debt crisis. They need to try to overcome their differences and embrace a cohesive approach towards development and tackling the debt problem. It may even be too late. There are some parts of the world, such as Africa, where debt is already getting very close to a regional crisis. Latin America and the Caribbean are also at risk, although some countries are already restructuring their debts. At any rate, the international community must do what it can before time runs out. For the future, there are two vital lessons. Countries need to tackle their structural issues early, and borrowing must be used for investment and not simply to finance budget deficits. If the world can make genuine progress on these fronts, situations like this can hopefully be avoided in the future. Most of the idea, comment, information, and criticism containing in these videos have been created by Daily News Report. Before making any important investment decision, use the information contained in these videos as a starting point for conducting your own research. If you make any investment or legal decision, it is advised to consult an expert before making this decision.